Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Diary of a Folk Witch. My name is Zanna and I am a practicing priestess, doula and animistic folk witch living in Lancashire. Here I will share with you a blend of essays and diary entries that allow you to peer into the very real world of a modern practicing, traditional style folk witch and wise woman. You are invited into my innermost world of actual everyday living witchcraft. Everything from folklore to foraging, herbalism to urban homesteading, divination, spiritual practice and more. I don't niche down here, you see it all. Because I'm not just a witch when I'm performing workings, it's in every area of my life. And you get to share that with me. Diaries are supposed to be places where we document our deepest secrets. But I believe some secrets are worth sharing. So let me share my life with you. Wintering, the art of human hibernation and self-care. Date: January 11th, 2024. Moon phase, new moon. Place: home, Lancashire. Weather: cold, bleak and very wet. The festive decorations have come down. The Yule tree has been sacrificially burnt for the New Year ritual. A personal family way of saying goodbye and thank you to the tree, as well as surrendering the previous year and welcoming in the new calendar year. The Christmas and Yule vibe is dimming, and yet we are still very much in the depths of winter, and it will be some time before we feel the warmth of the sun again. But at least we have now reached the halfway point. The winter solstice has reminded us that this cold season never lasts forever, and soon the light will return. Sadly, it's quite common for people to feel down during this time of year. January for many people can be an awfully long month. The back to work drudgery combined with paying off the previous year's Christmas, as well as feeling socially pressured to partake in things such as popular January fads like no spend challenges, pantry challenges, get fit challenges, and of course the popular dry January challenge. There is a key word here: challenge. There seems to be a socially and capitalist designed idea that January is a difficult month and so challenging. And why not? It's extremely profitable for companies to make people think that they have to do something or must join a gym in January to work off weight or buy some new gizmo in the January sales designed to somehow make life just that little bit less challenging. After all, January is supposed to be a month for resolutions and self-improvement, which, to be honest, has never made much sense to me. That always feels so much more of a September or even an October vibe, when the academic year is starting, harvests are finishing, and we can look towards new ways of growing over the darker months. But perhaps that's just me. I obviously cannot speak for everyone out there. Where it cannot be denied that January can indeed be challenging for many people from a financial point, or even that of simply missing the sun in general, in reality it's a month of the year that's not much different from any other month. Every month has its pros and cons. A lot of January and its perceived challenges comes down to our own personal perspectives, and perspectives can be altered with a little time, patience and magical attunement. Therefore, do we choose to see January as the long and dreary month of the year, a time when all the lights and festivities have gone, or do we see it as a month of possibilities and rest? I began to explore what many have now come to refer to as wintering about 10 years ago. And for the purpose of this entry, when I refer to wintering, what I'm talking about is the direct seeking of rest and retreat during the winter months, a way of recharging our physical and energetic batteries, or soul batteries as me and my eldest daughter sometimes call them. For those who practice the art of wintering, or for those of you who may be new to this, It's important to understand that everyone's wintering period or practice, and indeed their wintering needs, can be very different. A person who works full-time in winters will look vastly different from, say, a stay-at-home parent of multiple children or a single person who only works part-time. Therefore, I always tell friends and community members to go easy on yourself. Be realistic in how you adopt the craft of wintering and what it is you want to achieve. The term wintering and its included practices may vary from person to person, much like the way of folk witchcraft. But for the most part, wintering is the act of intentional self-care, usually taken during the actual winter months as a cyclical part of our own nature. It is not a practice that is not only particular to folk witches or pagans, but many people all around the world who now practice the art of self-care. However, despite being known as wintering, in reality this practice can occur when necessary at other times of the year too. When one feels the need to retreat from the world and rest, possibly for convalescence needs or to recover from stress, illness or trauma, or perhaps in some cases as a way of debriefing from this big and noisy world. This is particularly common with those of us who are neurodivergent and find that we need more quiet time than perhaps our neurotypical allies need. However, within today's entry, I am specifically talking about wintering throughout January as a personal observance within my own wheel of the year and physiological rhythms and cycles. I choose to observe wintering through January and sometimes into early February as a way of honouring my mind, body and spirit's call to retreat and reset, offering myself and my family a time of much needed rest and recuperation. One cannot run a car constantly. At some point you need to pull over and fuel up in order to continue along your journey. And for me, this is what my January wintering is all about. I am consciously listening to my body and utilising this quiet period when the earth still sleeps and there is little in the way of celebrations and social commitments to take some self-care time. And that is ultimately what wintering is. It's dedicated self-care time. When I finally emerge from my wintering around the time of Imbolc or just after, I find that I'm a little bit more put together and able for facing the rest of the year, especially as from February onwards, life starts to pick up again, with early seed sowing, tentatively waking up the garden, and noticing that even the hens and the ducks are ready to start laying again. As a comparison, it's common for many people to feel as though they struggle to get their day going without their daily cup of coffee. It's as much about morning ritual and routine and self-care as it is the energy offered up from the plant magic and caffeine properties. Equated on a slightly larger scale, myself and others may struggle to get the year going if we don't winter and self-care for a few weeks first. How one chooses to observe wintering is entirely down to personal preference. How I winter is down to mine and my family's needs. For example, as a neurodivergent woman with 5 children, we find that as a family we need January to be a physically quiet period. All of the bright lights and music of Yule and Christmas was certainly fun and yet also, if I'm honest, slightly overwhelming at the same time. So, because of this, we choose to have less invasive sounds and sights. We try to avoid busy places and reduce social commitments. After all, we spend so much of our spring, summer and autumn socialising and travelling that a quiet period is sometimes just what spirit needed. Yet for another person or family, they might find that they need a bit more of a social input for wintering. For this person, it might be switched up a bit. So instead of pubs, clubbing or large family lunches and get-togethers, it might be that they meet up more on a one-to-one basis, perhaps at a quiet and quaint coffee shop or even on your own turf at home. One of the many lessons that the practice of wintering has taught me is that it is crucial to do what is achievable. For many, working full-time is an absolute must, so we cannot always just take off and live a reclusive life at home for a month. But perhaps it might be possible to finish early some evenings or take some annual leave throughout January and have a staycation at home. Even if this is not possible, I try to remember that wintering isn't necessarily about hunkering down at home. It's about how we use our free time to practice self-care. If the only time we have is when we get in from work, the weekend, or when the kids go to sleep, go with it. After all, our self-care is about us and our needs, not how others practice it. Comparing ourselves to others is a waste of precious time when we could instead be living our best lives and dancing to our own tunes. For me, in my practice of wintering, there was no big revelation or seeing someone's vlog or trending posts on the now popular subject. No, I discovered this comforting and nurturing time quite by accident. Well, not entirely by accident. This is where the element of magical attunement comes in. I was, at the time, living alone with my young child, and as a way of coping with the loneliness, I decided to throw myself even further into my spiritual and witchcraft practices. I signed up to do my bardic grade with the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, and made a resolution to help my insomnia by learning more about the human circadian rhythm, specifically exploring it via the neo-pagan Wheel of the Year. It was not a quick study, and indeed I'm still very much learning about my own and my family's rhythms and cycles, and how they tie in with things like the weather, the Wheel of the Year, astrology, the agricultural seasons, which is a key one for us as we practice permaculture and urban homesteading. But over time, I began to recognise very specific cycles, not simply to do with my menstrual cycle and how when it's healthy and balanced it ties in with the new and the full moon, but bigger cycles too, like how I needed less sleep in the summer, more in the autumn, and then somewhere in between for the winter and spring periods. I noticed that I began to largely abandon fads like pantry challenges for January because intuitively I felt as though I should be doing this around the start of spring and the rebuilding of stores around September. This now makes perfect sense to me, as the time of the spring equinox has a lot to do with shedding what we no longer need, shedding in preparation for summer, where the time of the autumn equinox turns to rebuilding, preparing for the winter and stocking up. This is probably also why so many of us feel so called to do a big spring clean around the equinox. It's that intuitive call for shedding. However, this year is the exception to the rule. This month, my husband and I are breaking the tradition and doing a pantry challenge early, but only because we desperately need to repair and redecorate our pantry. Having such a wet winter has pushed the urgency of this task up our list because there is now damp and mould issues. Otherwise, this cyclical task would have waited a little longer. Indeed, it would have waited for the spring and been done with other spring equinox tasks such as spring cleaning. However, what with having such a large family, I can see us needing another stock take in the spring anyway. So this is the exception to the rule, and it isn't the end of the world or a huge disruption to our annual cycles. There are so many personal cyclical rhythms I could share with you here, but for the purpose of this entry, I feel it's important I stick to the topic at hand: wintering. Eventually, after paying careful attention to my body and its intuitive cycles, I began to realise that what was making me down in January was not the time of the year. It's beautiful. There's a real beauty here in the north of England, the windswept moors and the bare and spindly trees, and Pendle Hill covered in snow is mesmerising. No, what was making me feel down was the lack of sunlight triggering seasonal affective disorder, something I easily remedied with sad lamps, vitamins, eating more oats and other little tricks, such as leaving some of our festive fairy lights up. But instead of on the Yule tree, I now pop them on bookshelves and in vases, thus bringing in light and warmth without having a distinctive Christmassy vibe. And I get to illuminate all of my many book babies. Yes, my books are my babies. I order them neatly and correctly, talk to them and even thank them on the completion of reading. What self-respecting animistic witch wouldn't thank her books? Over time, I began to realise the other thing that was making me down was how much TV, social media and advertisements in general make us feel like January is a challenge, something to slog through. So one year I took a complete social media break for January, limited my screen time and decided that evenings would be quiet time. For me, this meant that all washing machines, dishwashers, ovens and any other noisy home appliances had to be off by 6 p.m, thus limiting irritating background noises. I bought 2 of my favourite blankets out of the airing cupboard and placed them near the sofa to cosy up with in the evenings. I created a to-read list which was strategically placed upon the coffee table in front of the sofa so that there was no chance of forgetting about them and grabbing the remote control instead. I told extended family and friends that I was planning on having a quiet January and would catch up with them in February. This meant that I could avoid any commitments or engagements that I didn't want to attend and could switch off my phone at will without fearing other family members or friends would be worried about me. I stocked up on some of my favourite herbal teas and cacao for evening warming brews, and I dug out my wellies and baby carrier and put them right by the front door. A reminder for every morning to take me and my young daughter out for a daily woodland winter walk. Back then, like now, I was blessed to live near woodlands. Indeed, ever since I made a specific promise to the gods to help preserve the earth and give more than I take, I always seem to find myself living next to woodlands, even though I never intentionally seek them out. In fact, the more I delve into permaculture, urban homesteading and the yearn for off-grid living, the closer my homes seem to be to woodlands. In the last 15 years since I made that pledge to the gods, I have moved 6 times, and with each move I have found myself moving closer and closer to the woodlands. The more I honour my promise, the more the gods seem to move me closer to nature. But I digress again. So often when I'm writing in my diary, a topic would jog my memory to a relatable story, and then my mind wanders and shares some precious memories, stories of synchronicities or magical workings and so on. In regard to my first wintering, I must admit that during the first few nights of implementing this quiet space, it was very strange. I found it tricky to adjust to the quiet and especially the lack of any background hum. Limiting my use of social media was a little bit easier, as I have always had a bit of a love-hate relationship with it. And as the month journeyed on, I made some tweaks here and there, such as learning to crochet as well as reading, and my goodness how glad I am that I learnt that. Now I make all sorts of things and will soon be doing a talk for the Wirral Pathways Festival about crafting within witchcraft, especially touching upon the use of crochet within folkways and witchcraft. The end result to my first wintering was phenomenal. I was less stressed, less anxious, sleeping better, and had more energy during the day. My daily woodland walks with my daughter in the baby carrier had me feeling more grounded than ever and increasingly connected to my local landscapes and the spirits of the area, especially with those of one particular tree that my daughter and I called the fairy tree. It was a large old tree with an obvious fairy door at the base of it. Every morning when we would pass, I would tip my hat and say, "Fair morning to you, guardians of the woods. I will treat this space with care and respect." Little ways like this would spark conversations with my toddler daughter about fairy lore, spirits of the land, and how not all fairies were nice or to be trusted. In fact, the fae, or she, should be treated with both caution and respect. I would share with my child folklore and plant lore, and when we reached home, we would have a warm lunch and cuddly nap. This particular January was a slow one, but beautiful, and set the tone for many more Januaries to come. Now, all these years later, I find that far from dreading the first calendrical month of the year, I look forward to it, We have already seen extended family and friends over the holidays, so there's no need to travel far, and because we home educate our children, there's no manic or hectic school runs to deal with in the early mornings. We can sleep for the hours that our bodies need and rise when those bodies tell us it's time to embrace the day. Usually at around 8:30am, and then our day of learning starts around 10 or 10:30. January is a big month for cooking in our family. As my daughters are getting bigger, they love to winter with me in the kitchen and learn more kitchen witchery, learning new recipes as well as those passed down to us from the ancestors. For example, this week we made what was my nan's famous suet bacon pudding, which, to those unfamiliar with this, it's effectively a large dumpling that contains bacon, onions and herbs and can be sliced and shared like a cake, but you'd share it with vegetables and gravy. We also made a bread recipe handed down to me from one of my great-grandmothers from back in Ireland. Together, my daughters and I mindfully make a lot of soups and stews, and on colder days when we need a pick-me-up, we make spiced baked apples and crumbles to be served alongside the obligatory hot chocolate. Luxury and self-care in January is crucial, and for us, cooking isn't work, it's both a hobby and a calling. Good food is soul food, an alchemy that turns nature's goodness into nutritional goodness and magic. Another wonderful aspect of wintering is that it doesn't have to all be indoors. Yes, it's true, there are loads of reels and fancy YouTube videos showing cottagecore-like chicks in their trendy cottage-themed homes, sipping tea from vintage china while poring over old botany books, all trying so hard to show that they're adhering to some form of self-care. But there is one problem, at least in my humble opinion, and that is nearly all of these videos show the person wrapped up cosy at home. Now, that's all well and good, but self-care isn't all about being a couch potato wrapped up in a fancy Aran blanket and reading a book, though fair play if that's your personal choice. Wintering can also be about woodland walks, traversing the moors, taking a quiet wander around an art gallery on a day that you know it will be quiet, or even going to a little coffee shop out of town. There are virtues, of course, in staying home tucked up warm in one of the coldest months of the year, but it also isn't healthy to stay home all the time. If you are well and able and the weather isn't unsafe, I find that it's always best to go out and connect with nature and culture. Getting out of the house is just as much an act of self-care as staying home. One of my favourite things to do when wintering is to visit the Yorkshire village of Haworth. It's literally just over the Lancashire border, so on my way there and back I get to drive through the Forest of Bowland, and my gods, the view of Pendle Hill as you drop back down off the moors is just phenomenal. It's out of this world. Haworth is my quiet space. As a lover of literature and the collective works of the Bronte sisters, I love nothing more than quiet walks around the Bronte parsonage, which was their home, or the school in which Charlotte Bronte used to teach in, before heading down along the main road and traditional northern cobbled streets, with all of its shop fronts nearly all sporting their traditional Victorian style. I then grab a cup of coffee or a hot chocolate and have a look around the many quaint bookshops, stores and boutiques before coming home again, feeling at the top of the world. Of course, I do love a quiet woodland, forest and seaside walk too, but for me what really recharges my batteries is anything to do with art, history or literature. For me, they are just as much my happy place as any of my magical working spots. Another thing I like to prioritise in January is sleep. Good sleep is something I've struggled with for most of my life. Insomnia is a monster that rears its head all too often, but January offers me a time to consciously reset. I like to try to treat myself to a new bedding set in the January sales, something soft and warm like brushed cotton, so when I fall into bed it offers me the height of comfort. I also cleanse and reset my bedroom as a spiritual extension of what many people refer to as sleep hygiene. I will physically tidy and organise my bedroom, and then cleanse it with locally foraged mugwort, drumming, bells, and finally aromatherapy. Throughout January, I try to go to bed when my kids go to sleep, and even though I usually cannot sleep, it's a wonderful feeling to be curled up in the dark, with the curtains wide open so I can see the moonlight in the trees and read a book on my Kindle. This week's read is a fascinating book by Philip Heselton, a biography on the famous witch Doreen Valiente, who is often considered to be the mother of modern witchcraft. Another thing I like to do on my early nights is to listen to audiobooks. At the moment, I'm currently listening to an audiobook called Branches, Roots and Spirits by Byron Ballard. It's all about Appalachian folk magic in America, and it is brilliant. I am really enjoying it. Not only is the work of the author brilliant, but the narrator of the audiobook has a voice like soft, sweet honey. So when I listen to this book, I am immediately relaxed and transported to our friends across the pond in America. One of the things I like to assess in January during my wintering period is boundaries. I am not the sort of person who struggles to implement boundaries. If anything, it comes a little bit easy to me. I grew up in a home, being the eldest of 6 children, and you had to learn to say no quickly, otherwise you'd be walked all over. As an adult in our home, no is a complete sentence, and I am teaching our children that the word no is a powerful affirmation that can offer them protection of mind, body, spirit, consent and personal time. I make no apologies for wintering in January, and neither should you, dear friends. Self-care is also community care. If you do not look after yourself, you cannot hope to look after or work cohesively with others. If you need to winter, but others are trying to enforce their will or expectations upon you, try, where possible, to say no thank you, or an outright no if you have to. Your space, time and health matter. If you don't fancy going out or you want a night in, then be kind to yourself and say no. Hobbies. Wintering offers the perfect opportunity to learn new skills, catch up with reading or quietly pursue hobbies. One of my funny little cyclical traits is that every winter, without fail, I pick up my crochet. I so rarely work with yarn in the lighter months, and yet as soon as the days draw in, out come things like my crochet hook, or second magic wand as I sometimes call it, my drop spindle, and sometimes even my spinning wheel. Though I must be honest and admit that I'm still very much a student of the spinning wheel, and together me and Frigg are working very hard on learning this skill. She is becoming a wonderful guide in this way. But then that's hardly surprising when the goddess Frigg is so often associated with drop spindles and fate and spinning wheels and yarn. January offers us the perfect time to make the most of the long, dark winter evenings and enjoy the things that bring us joy. I love nothing more than listening to an audiobook or podcast while doing crochet in the evening and learning a new pattern, or reading and having some peaceful instrumental music in the background. Hobbies are a wonderful way of allowing ourselves to debrief while simultaneously cultivating ourselves and growing at the same time. Hobbies allow our brains to switch off, and so in themselves are an act of self-care. I hope you enjoyed this entry today and that you found some joy or inspiration on the topic of wintering. If you've never heard of wintering before and would like to try it, please do. It's a magical period of self-care, and, as I tell many witches who often talk with me about social burnout, self-care is community care. It's all well and good being your community or village witch, but you cannot pour from an empty cup or cauldron, so prioritise filling it for yourself. From the time, mist and distance between us, blessings from me to you.